Friends, happy holidays to everyone. Today, we have a special tank for you nicknamed the Fir Tree. In the 50s of the last century, France created a tank that weighed as much as 3 passenger cars, was 1.5 meters tall, and had armor like a tin can. Any machine gun punched right through it. And do you know what French engineers decided to put on it? 4 huge 120-millimeter cannons, 4 barrels on a machine the size of a small sedan. But that is not even the craziest thing about this story. The craziest thing is why they created this monster at all, and why the military seriously considered it for combat operations. It all started on one black day when the great French colonial empire began to crumble right before everyone's eyes. May 7, 1954, northern Vietnam, the valley of Dien Bien Phu. After 54 days of bloody siege, the French garrison capitulated. Over 10,000 French soldiers surrendered to Vietnamese partisans. Elite paratroopers of the Foreign Legion, who were considered invincible, were crushed by a peasant army in the jungle. It was not just a military defeat. It was the humiliation of a great colonial power. France had been fighting in Indochina for 8 years since 1946. Thousands of killed soldiers, billions of francs in military spending, endless promises from the government about imminent victory. And everything collapsed in a single moment. On May 7th, Vietnamese soldiers raised a red flag over the French command post in Dien Bien Phu. On May 8th, negotiations began in Geneva regarding the capitulation of France and the withdrawal of troops from Indochina. French society was in shock. A country that considered itself a great power lost a war to partisans. France's prestige on the international stage collapsed. But the worst was yet to come. Just 6 months after the humiliating defeat at Dien Bien Phu, a new catastrophe struck. In the night of November 1st, 1954, explosions thundered simultaneously across all of Algeria. The National Liberation Front attacked French military bases, administrative buildings, and police stations in different ends of the country. This was not just a series of terrorist attacks, it was a declaration of war. The Algerians chose the moment perfectly. Combat units were still in Vietnam, awaiting evacuation after the defeat. The president of the Council of Ministers of France was on a state visit to Canada. In the metropolis itself, they were preparing for the visit of the Emperor of Ethiopia. French intelligence knew about the preparing uprising. They even knew the approximate dates, the end of 1954. But the rebels struck ahead of schedule when France was maximally disorganized. France was burning at both ends. Indochina was lost definitively. Algeria was on fire. Morocco and Tunisia began demanding independence. The colonial empire, which had been built for more than 100 years, was falling apart before their eyes. What do you think happened next? The French military command feverishly sought a solution on how to control huge territories with limited forces, how to rapidly deploy troops to where an uprising flares up. The regular army acts too slowly. While they bring up reinforcements by sea, while they deploy bases, while they organize supply, weeks and months pass. During this time, the rebels manage to entrench themselves, receive support from the population, and create fortified areas. Mobile, rapid reaction forces were needed. Troops that could be deployed to any point of the empire in a matter of hours. And the solution seemed obvious. Airborne troops. Transport planes can end up on the other side of the world in one night, drop fighters with parachutes, and immediately begin an operation. No ports are needed, No airfields with concrete runways are needed. No months of preparation are needed. You jump with a parachute and go straight into battle. But paratroopers have a fundamental problem. They jump from the sky traveling light. Assault rifles, machine guns, grenades, anti-tank grenade launchers. That is all their weaponry. You cannot drop heavy equipment with a parachute. Anti-tank guns, mortars, and artillery have to be delivered separately after the landing when transport planes can land. But what to do if the enemy meets the paratroopers with tanks? Grenade launchers are not very effective against armored vehicles. One needs to get close to a dangerously short distance. Anti-tank rifles were obsolete. And then something happened that no one expected. Someone in the Ministry of Defense of France put forward an idea that at first glance seemed brilliant, and at second glance, absolutely insane. What if we drop tanks together with the paratroopers? Light air-droppable tanks that can be loaded into a transport plane, dropped on parachutes, and immediately entered into battle. On paper, it looked like the solution to all problems. Paratroopers receive heavy weaponry right at the moment of landing. No need to wait for reinforcements. No need to look for an airfield for landing transporters with equipment. You dropped a tank with a parachute, the crew climbed inside, and you can fight. The military lit up with this idea. Imagine, at night, transport planes fly over Algeria, drop paratroopers, and following them fly tanks on huge parachute systems. The rebels think they are dealing with light infantry, and half an hour after the drop, they are already under attack by armored vehicles. But the most interesting part began when engineers started calculating. Specialists quickly understood the scale of the catastrophe. French transport planes of the mid-50s physically could not lift an ordinary tank. Even the lightest tank of that time weighed too much. After long calculations, they determined a maximum of 6 tons, in an extreme case, 8. This is the weight of 3 passenger cars. Now imagine the task. You need to squeeze into this weight everything that makes a tank a tank. Armor capable of protecting against bullets and shrapnel, a cannon capable of destroying enemy tanks, ammunition, an engine, fuel, transmission, tracks, a guidance system, observation devices, and 3 crew members with their equipment. Physics is merciless. If you make the tank light enough for transport, a large caliber machine gun will punch through it. If you give it normal armor, it becomes too heavy for the plane. If you install a powerful cannon, it takes up half the volume of the machine and weighs several tons together with ammunition. If you save on weaponry, the tank turns into a useless target that will be destroyed by the first enemy tank it meets. Any rational engineer would say, "It is impossible. You cannot cheat the laws of physics. You cannot create a tank of such weight that will be protected from fire and capable of fighting armored vehicles. This contradicts common sense." But the French military did not care about common sense. The empire was burning. In Algeria, French soldiers were dying every day. An urgent solution was needed, at least some kind. And in December 1954, just 1 month after the start of the Algerian War, the Ministry of Defense of France officially launched the program Engin Léger de Combat, Light Combat Vehicle, abbreviated ELC. The technical requirements were tough to the point of absurdity. Combat mass of no more than 6 to 8 tons, the ability to destroy enemy tanks at a distance of up to 1,000 meters, full armor protection for the crew from bullets and shrapnel, high movement speed, excellent maneuverability, the possibility of transport in a cargo plane and dropping on parachutes. The military was effectively demanding the impossible. They wanted to get a full-fledged tank destroyer weighing as much as a few cars. They wanted this tank to fly on a parachute. They wanted its armor to protect the crew. They wanted it to destroy Soviet heavy tanks at 1,500 meters. And they were absolutely serious. The program was launched on a competitive basis. The Ministry of Defense announced that any French company could present its project. Let the engineers rack their brains on how to combine the incompatible. Let them decide themselves how to cheat the laws of physics. The main thing is that by the end of the 50s, France should have an air-droppable tank. And you know what? Brave souls were found who took on this insane task. Engineers were found who decided that they could create what is impossible to create. Companies were found that believed that French genius and ingenuity would defeat stubborn physics. Two completely different companies decided to fight for the contract. On one side, the industrial giant AMX, with years of experience and all resources. On the other, Brunon-Valette, a small firm from a provincial town. But the most interesting part began when both presented their solutions, because the approaches turned out to be diametrically opposite. AMX decided to go down the path of extreme minimalism. Their logic was ironclad. If a tank must weigh 6 tons and at the same time destroy enemy armored vehicles, it means we need to make it so small that the enemy simply cannot hit it. An invisible ghost on the battlefield. The engineers created a machine with a height of only 1,430 millimeters to the turret roof. This is lower than a human's height. The Soviet light amphibious tank T-38 was taller. The hull length was 3,750 millimeters, shorter than a modern sedan. To squeeze everything necessary into such dimensions, they had to make monstrous sacrifices. The driver was placed in the turret in a lying position right together with the commander. The engine was placed in the front, the fuel tank in the back, the crew in the middle, and a turret the size of a telephone booth. The conditions for the crew turned out to be so terrible that the military called them inhumane. The driver lay in the turret, looking into periscopic instruments. In marching mode, he still remained there. There was nowhere to climb out. In combat position, it became even worse. They tried to fix the situation, redesign the layout, return to a 2-man turret where the commander and gunner sat more or less normally. But this only confirmed the main thing. It is impossible to create a full-fledged tank weighing 6 tons without monstrous compromises. But Brunon-Valette went a completely different way. And here something happened that no one expected. The engineers proposed a revolutionary concept, a modular platform. The idea was simple and genius at the same time. Why create 10 different tanks when you can make one base chassis and change combat modules on top? The base chassis remains unchanged. Tracks, engine, transmission, hull armor, and on top, different turrets with different weaponry are installed. Today, an anti-tank gun is needed. We put on one turret. Tomorrow, automatic cannons against infantry are required. We change to another. The day after tomorrow, an anti-aircraft installation is needed. We install a third. The military lit up with this idea instantly. Imagine the savings. One tank fulfills 5 different roles. Logistics are simplified many times over. All spare parts for the chassis are identical. Production becomes cheaper. No need to make 5 different factory lines. Crew training is facilitated. Drivers and mechanics work with one platform. The concept of modularity was so advanced for the 50s that the military immediately approved the continuation of development. Brunon-Valette received the green light for the creation of several variants of weaponry for a unified chassis. Work began on the family of machines ELC Avon. The base chassis was designed taking into account the installation of different turrets. Hull height about 1.5 meters, length a little less than 4 meters. Chassis mass with crew about 6.5 tons, engine 160 horsepower. Maximum speed 70 kilometers per hour. Armor was minimal, but this was considered an acceptable compromise. 15 millimeters in the front, 10 on the sides and rear. Any large caliber machine gun punched right through. High explosive shells turned the armor into a sieve, but the engineers were betting on something else: speed, maneuverability, and firepower. The idea consisted of the fact that the tank should not get hit at all. It is too fast, too small, too unnoticeable. The enemy simply will not have time to aim before receiving a volley from a powerful weapon. And now, the most interesting part. While AMX suffered with placing the crew in a tiny hull, Brunon-Vallette calmly developed several variants of weaponry for their platform, and each subsequent variant became increasingly crazy. The military watched both developments with interest. The experienced giant against the daring provincial firm, technological minimalism against revolutionary modularity, extreme compactness against universality. In 1957, AMX began developing a new chassis, introducing many changes to increase reliability. In 1961, they created a reinforced hull with armor up to 40 millimeters under rational angles of inclination up to 80 degrees. Brunon-Vallette, meanwhile, experimented with weaponry. Blueprints of various turrets were created, variants of installing guns of different calibers were worked out, prototypes were built for tests. How do you think all this will end? The military continued testing both machines. The tanks were taken to proving grounds, fired from, driven over rough terrain. Maneuverability, speed, accuracy of fire, and comfort for the crew were evaluated. Years went by, money was spent, prototypes were built, reports were written, but with every month it became increasingly obvious: something is going wrong. There is something fundamentally incorrect in the very concept of an air-droppable tank destroyer. Brunon-Vallette engineers began creating variants. The first, ELC, even 30, received two 30mm automatic cannons from Hispano-Suiza. Two autocannons were installed on both sides of the turret. A little closer to the center, two machine guns were placed. Rapid-fire automatic cannons created dense fire against light vehicles and infantry of the enemy. The concept was logical: a tiny fast tank saturating the target with automatic fire, appeared from behind a hill, shot up a column of trucks or an infantry unit, and disappeared. Partisan tactics on tracks. The second variant, ELC even 90, went further. Instead of two small caliber cannons and machine guns, engineers installed one 90mm DIFA low-pressure gun on the right of the turret. Now, the tiny tank could fight against real enemy tanks. The military nodded. The concept works. Modularity proves its usefulness. One day, the tank fights infantry. The other day, it destroys enemy tanks. You just change the turret, and it is ready. But Brunon-Vallette engineers clearly did not intend to stop. They created a third variant, and this is where the real madness began. ELC, even 120. On a tank 1.5 meters high and weighing less than 7 tons, they proposed installing 4 recoilless guns of caliber 120 millimeters, 2 guns on the right, 2 on the left in horizontal pairs. It looked absurd, as if someone took a child's toy and attached an artillery battery to it. The barrels stuck out of the turret like the ears of an abnormal rabbit. a tank the size of a passenger car, and hanging on it are 4 huge cannons. Constructors claimed that the gunner would be able to reload all 4 guns without going outside. For this, they came up with a cunning system. The driver had to either turn the turret so as to open a hatch and insert new shells without leaving his seat, or climb out and reload standing next to the tank. A variant with cut rear parts of the barrels was even proposed to turn them inside the turret for reloading. Volleys from 4 120mm guns would destroy any tank guaranteed. On paper, it sounded impressive. In reality, 4 recoilless guns firing simultaneously from a platform weighing 7 tons would either tip the tank over or tear its structure apart from vibration. And now, the most interesting part. The military doubted because the engineers proposed yet another variant. Only 2 120mm guns, but each with a 5-round automatic loader of the revolver type. Automatic reloading, 10 shots without stopping. This version was never built. Apparently, even French engineers understood that they had gone too far. 2 automatic 120mm guns on a 7-ton tank is already outright insanity. But the fantasy did not end. They proposed a variant with anti-tank guided missiles, 4 SS-11 missiles or 2 larger SS-12 on a special flat turret. For the 50s, this was an advanced weapon. Guided missiles were just entering military practice. In total, the Brunin-Vallette Company manufactured 10 pre-production examples with various weaponry. Each variant was actively tested. The military wanted to understand what works better: automatic cannons, an anti-tank gun, recoilless guns, or missiles. When firing from the 90mm gun, the entire tank shook from recoil. Aiming was thrown off instantly. Accurate shooting was possible only from a standstill. Moreover, after each shot, one had to re-aim the gun at the target. And the version with 4 120mm recoilless guns behaved unpredictably. When they fired from all 4 barrels simultaneously, the tank literally jumped in place. Jet streams from the rear parts of the recoilless guns raised huge clouds of dust and unmasked the position instantly. After the volley, the crew saw nothing in the cloud of smoke and dust, while the enemy saw perfectly where the shots came from. The next volley only after the dust settles. And that is time. Time during which the enemy manages to shoot back. Machine guns of caliber 12.7mm punch through the tank from any distance. 15mm of armor in the front, 10 on the sides. This is not protection. This is a symbol. High explosive shells turned the hull into a sieve. 1 mortar shell hit, and the crew received multiple wounds from shrapnel punching through the armor. The military understood. The tank is fast and unnoticeable. The weaponry is powerful, but it is absolutely unprotected. This is a self-propelled gun with symbolic armor. The first serious battle, and the crew will perish from a machine gun burst. Tests continued, new prototypes were built, reports were written, but the results remained disappointing. Each variant of weaponry had fatal flaws. 30mm cannons could not penetrate tank armor. The 90mm gun lost aim after every shot. 4 120mm guns unmasked the tank with a dust cloud after the first volley. And most importantly, no weaponry solved the basic problem. The tank remained a tin box that any large caliber machine gun punched through. By the end of the 50s, it became finally clear the ELC program had failed. No variant of weaponry could turn a 7-ton tin box into an effective combat machine. In 1958, dramatic events occurred in France. On May 13th, the French army in Algeria staged a mutiny against the civil authorities. The government of the Fourth Republic collapsed. Charles de Gaulle returned to power. On September 28, 1958, the French approved a new constitution in a referendum. Almost 80% of votes. The Fourth Republic died. The Fifth was born. On December 21st, de Gaulle became president. The new president understood reality. The colonial empire was falling apart irreversibly. In Algeria, a partisan war was going on in the mountains and deserts. There were no tank battles there. Tank destroyers weighing 6 tons were not needed there. At the end of 1961, the Ministry of Defense closed the Engins Légers de Combat program. The official wording, the project is recognized as having little promise. Instead of experimental tanks, they decided to improve the proven AMX-13. Several prototypes were sent to a museum. The AMX-ELC bis still stands in the Tank Museum of the city of Saumur. Brunon Valette prototypes were preserved in storerooms and private collections. Algeria gained independence in 1962 after 8 years of war. The program consumed 10 years of work and millions of francs. The result? Museum exhibits. But history has an unexpected finale. Half a century later, the little French tank found a second life in the computer game world of tanks. The ELC, even 90, became a cult machine. Players nicknamed it the Fir Tree. Tiny, fast, with a powerful cannon, exactly as its creators saw it. In the virtual world, the tank finally received the application that it was not destined to find in reality. Grandiose engineering ambitions crashed against the harsh reality of war and politics. Small tank destroyers remained only a reminder of this, like if this was interesting. Subscribe to the channel to learn about other absurd military projects. And remember, sometimes the craziest ideas become legends, even if only in computer games.